Hello and welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. Today, I'm joined by Ramani Varanasi. Ramani is somebody who actually helps organizations with their entrepreneurial adventures. In patient advocacy. She's an optimist. She's a board member and a CEO. And so, welcome, Ramani.
Thank you, Don. Really glad to be here.
Yeah, can you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I love how you use the term sort of adventures. My whole life has been an adventure and a journey, as I say. So I'm on the journey. So my background is I'm a scientist by training, by passion, but I'm a scientist turned corporate executive and entrepreneur. I have worked at the bench. I have been involved in corporate transactions, M&As, building, founding, growing companies. I identified, or I should say, I founded my own company and grew it. And I spend quite a bit of time these days advising. So I feel like I've kind of come full circle in some ways. But essentially, scientist at heart, but ultimately corporate executive. I do say oftentimes, though, that I can play a chief scientific officer on TV or a chief medical officer on TV or you name it, because having been a CEO, as you know, CEOs often have to, get quite adept at speaking the language of sort of the different functionalities that they're overseeing. And so I play a lot of people on TV, but today I'm just playing myself. Really glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. And so, I mean, in terms of that experience, let me just, kind of take us just a little bit deeper into your experience overall. Do you find that having the ability to kind of know that player and coach role, helps you as well with the companies that you work with?
Absolutely. So, I don't think you can be a coach unless you've been coached, right? You need to have sort of come from the ranks, if you will. And I certainly did my part and my time in coming from the ranks. As I was sort of undertaking my initiatives, in my younger years, I often leaned on mentors, heavily mentors, less sponsors, because I don't think that concept was really there. But they were instrumental in guiding me, in being there and sort of availing themselves to me to address any question I had, whether it be naive or not, because there's no real such thing as a naive question. Now I find myself on the other side of the table, so to speak, where I feel like I have an opportunity and I'm kind of get joy in being able to give back and being able to help others grow and help them sort of um, unveil or capture their vision for their companies and even for their professional careers. And so it's that sort of, you know, coach slash mentor role I often play. But while I am doing that, I'm also learning from the people I work with. So you never really give up the role of being a mentee yourself, if you understand what I'm saying. You're constantly kind of going
Yeah.
through life and professionally learning things and learning things from people that you never thought you would learn anything from, specifically young entrepreneurs who these days are just so filled with passion and energy. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this is why I do what I do, because I want to help them foster the energy they have. So I have, been fortunate and more than anything in being the recipient, as I said, of a lot of mentorship from individuals. One of the things I also do is these days is, and I think it's really important in the world that we live in, where diversity, equity, and inclusion, those principles are really at the highlight of everything, at the forefront of everything. I think it's important for those of us who are in a position to be sponsors to truly intentionally sponsor those who we can.
Mm.
Because in the absence of raising someone up, it's very difficult for people to climb the ladder. And that is specifically true for those who are from underrepresented groups. And so I spend quite a bit of time as part of my mentoring and coaching and advisory work, working with entrepreneurs, many of whom are, come from quote unquote diverse backgrounds or come from underrepresented backgrounds, and who have the wherewithal, but who just don't really have the connections or the network, or who might not know how to network. And that's where I sort of get joy in being able to give back what I was fortunate enough in receiving in my early years.
I mean, it's such a good story too, because I mean, to me, it's one of the greatest things that I've found. Even since expanding more of my network and doing this is one example of the same sort of thing that where just being able to sort of talk about your experience and where you've been. It helps me overall kind of understand too where there might be other fits inside of my network, and so I love doing that. Tying people back together again and being kind of that link between individuals that have a need and individuals that might be able to fill that need. So it's such a great story.
Donna, just sort of as you were saying that, I reflected on something that it was a term we used to use back in my millennium days. And so I spent time. So just a little bit of quick background: scientist. I'm Canadian. I grew up in Montreal. Finished my schooling, my graduate work there, and then worked in a small company, and then at Merck, which is Merck Frost was the R&D arm of Merck, and then came to Boston to join a company in the heyday of genomics in the 90s, early 90s. It was called Millennium, and back then, Millennium was all about change and positive change and a growth mindset, all of which we all retain these days as well. But the one thing that we used to use, the terminology was change agent, or the glue that made it stick,
Sure.
right? And so to your comment regarding connector, I often find myself in that role. And if I can just connect two people so that they can go off and have a conversation and start something great, then I've done my bit. And so there's it's those little things that really make a huge difference that you would never peg any value on, but ultimately, that's what I do enjoy doing these days.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were previously the CEO of Xbiotics. What was the focus of Xbiotics?
Yeah. So, as the name would indicate, for those who kind of understand the world of antibiotics, X, sort of implies killing, right? So, antibiotics. So, we were a company that worked on the discovery of novel chemical scaffolds or antibiotic molecules, small molecules, to kill bacteria, which we term in our sort of everyday parlance superbugs. So these are gram negative bacteria, a type of bacteria that has been shown to be heavily resistant to existing and available antibiotics. And, the concept of superbugs is a well known, well accounted for phenomenon. They're here, they're killing people. People are demonstrating resistance to available drugs. And, as we sort of often talk in our antibiotic community, there's going to be a tsunami of this huge magnitude of resistance coming through. And, if we've learned nothing from the COVID pandemic, hopefully we've walked away from the notion of preparedness. And so it's important to translate that theme to the world of antibiotics, which is what Xbiotics is trying to do. And so we were spending some time discovering these novel antibiotics and then testing them through the drug development process or drug discovery process. We had a pipeline of 3 or 4 active compounds that showed really good activity against some of the real tough bugs. And ultimately, government funding always is a challenge, especially when COVID comes into play. But we started off with very much a focus on global public health, because to me, all things are global. We don't live in an isolated US centric world or North American centric world. Anything we do in the healthcare industry has to really spread across and span across geographies. And that's where the notion of health equity comes in, which is something else I spend quite a bit of time thinking about. So, all in to say that the company was an early stage company, raised a Series A, and then spent quite a bit of time actually on the legislative side, because the government has a big part to play in
Mm.
whether or not the space of antibiotics can be a successful one, because there are some commercial and market barriers that exist. And unless and until they are removed and or improved, but hopefully removed by legislators, there just won't really be forward progress. And so we ran into, much like most other antibiotic companies, the challenge of convincing investors that this was an optimum space to invest in. And so, given the choice of investing in, some cool oncology, novel technology that would give them a 5 to 10x return overnight, versus investing in the world of antibiotics, it was kind of an easy choice for them. So, my goal for all the initiatives I'm involved in today and hopefully in the future is to continue to shed light on the importance not just of antibiotics overall, but of the investment community and the drug development and healthcare community focusing on those areas of unmet need that are truly unmet because of all the forces working against them, right?
Yeah.
So that's the scenario in which you need support, and so antibiotics falls in that space. And ultimately, we had to sort of wind down a lot of the efforts and publish our data, but we did good by getting our data out in the public domain so that others in the field could use that data and advance their programs.
So there's a couple of key things that I'm pulling out of this as well. That I mean, the first part on World Health, you're so right. I mean, it's the the work that was done in Ebola, SARS, and MERS that really kind of provided that quick foundation is what I saw. With the recovery efforts more or less with COVID. If we wouldn't have had those learnings, some of these companies wouldn't have had things to supply nearly as quickly, it seems. And then, kind of the other, aspect of this is there's a, and I'm trying to remember the project. There was another podcast that actually was talking about this idea of having open science. And so, a lot of people, go through and patent everything that they do. And then the science more or less is locked. You can't then leverage it in other projects. And so, there's I know a lot of projects going on that are kind of leveraging this idea of hey, how do we continue the thinking so that okay, so our project may not have continued, but how do we at least continue that forethought?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly in the antibiotic space, there have been many companies that have had to shutter down, and as part of that effort, they sort of put data and to some extent even compounds kind of in the public domain for other groups to access. Now, we tend to we're walking a little bit of a fine line when we start talking about intellectual property protection or no protection, right? I mean, as we know, without getting onto all sort of the political and, sort of business details, it's important for companies, for innovators to be able to protect their intellectual property. There's a lot of money, especially on the
Absolutely.
pharma, that goes into R&D and commercializing drugs. And if there is no opportunity to reap that reward, then innovators are going to not innovate. And so it's that sort of, dichotomy between, like, do you just make it available to everybody and make it a kind of a fair market economy, and then the question becomes what's fair or not fair, when you're talking about innovators versus patients. And so this is the, no, in my view, sort of no big question or no big topic such as, for instance, climate change or climate resilience or even healthcare inequity comes to the table without two sides to the equation.
Oh, sure.
And so I think this particular one as well has that. So, but you're absolutely right. I mean, innovators are doing what they can to best innovate. They're also trying to protect their IP, but also trying to, I think, these days think really out of the box about how to address inequities on the healthcare side, not just by disseminating the IP, which doesn't really enable what we want to do, because if you've got some creative intellectual property, for instance, a manufacturing of Moderna's COVID vaccine, for instance,
Mhm.
putting that data out there on the IP side does nothing to get that vaccine to patients, right? Because the manufacturers need to be real. There's a lot of know-how that goes around or goes behind developing those drugs, and so I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope. But I think open access, to the extent we can possibly make that happen in all areas, is a good thing, as long as there's the appropriate protection for those innovators who are actually putting their best foot forward in terms of their dollars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
an absolutely key point as well. I mean, it's not like the next innovation isn't going to cost a lot of money to bring to the finish line, and that money has to come from somewhere. And if it's not from the current things that are out in the market, then where else? And I think
Right.
that's, I mean, it's a struggle in general with regards to what I see with startups inside of, the pharma industry is, so many there's so many good ideas that I sort of review, and outside of my normal client work, as well as in my regular client work, and I see so many good ideas, but the reality is these ideas won't be producing revenue for years to come. I mean,
Yeah.
they're still so far away from actually being able to do that. And so being able to kind of coach people through that, but also understanding that, hey, if your idea doesn't make it, you hear some ways that you might be able to continue some of the thinking without actually giving up everything is important.
Yep. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And so, we at Xbiotics sort of embrace that concept. Our investors, thankfully, also were of that mindset, which is not to hoard, but rather to share and to get it out there. And so, the company still does hold intellectual property around the programs that we developed. And over time, there may be opportunities to sort of have those land in particular companies through partnerships. But for the time being, we've published the data and we've enabled others to really access that data and advance similarly situated programs.
Okay. And you're currently the managing director of Revive Advisors. So, what is your focus there?
Yeah, so there I help CEOs, whether they be startup CEOs or growth phase CEOs, and entrepreneurs launch companies, think about strategies to fundraise and partner and finance, et cetera, et cetera. And so I basically play the role of an executive advisor to them with the experience I have in having done a lot of that, both at big and small companies, and really support them. And I like to think of myself as um, a thought partner, someone whom
Mm,
they can turn to and rely on, have full confidence in that things will be held in confidence. With my board experience, also, I help them in thinking about how to build their boards, how to possibly think about serving on boards other than their own, and just, lend a hand as it pertains to really thinking about starting and or growing their companies, and including things like building teams and what are the ins and outs, and are there people they can connect with respect to specific expertise that they want to build on. So again, being coming back to the concept of the connector, playing that connector for them in a way where I can be value added, but also not sort of like nose in, hands out. I'm not doing the work for them, I'm guiding them, because it's really their jobs to do the work.
yeah, I mean, all in all, it's in building a company. At times, it has to feel like there are just so many jobs to be done, and just not enough, sort of understanding of how to get it all done. But at the same time, I've seen a couple things not done right. I mean, one is, just choosing the wrong investor. I've seen, individuals that choose the wrong sort of board members. And they also don't think about their teams the right way. And so you start to question, well, why is this person, key on your leadership team? And you sort of, start to peel it back piece by piece. And, maybe there was a relationship there before, maybe there's some other reason why that person's there, but it's just like, but what purpose are they serving? I mean, right now you're
Yeah.
at a very fragile state. You can't just carry people because you want to carry people, unfortunately. And those are some of the conversations I know I find myself in, as well as just, I, help me understand this a little bit more, because I'm not exactly following the purpose, in this.
Well,
And yeah.
completely. And, just to kind of add on to that, Don, a lot of the people I work with and run across, and I don't work with everyone because my time is limited, and, there are other advisors out there. Um, it, there's this sense that everyone is running the race or running a
Mm,
race,
mm,
and they must win it. And I'm not quite sure what race it is, because I have a little bit of FOMO there. I'm like, wait, what am I missing out on? What race am I not running here? I find entrepreneurs and younger CEOs these days, have this sort of view that I have to do it quickly and my company is going to be a unicorn tomorrow.
Mm,
And we know, for those of us who've been in the industry, more than 20 years, we know that unicorns don't happen overnight. We know that the markets drive a lot. We know that things can be bullish and bearish. We know that there's, irrational exuberance, to use that term again. And part of grounding these people, or part of my role is to ground these people, just as I was grounded, right?
hmm
And to remind them that it's a slow and steady race. It may be a race, but it's a slow and steady one. And let's use the analogy of the tortoise and the hare, right? So it's just kind of slowing things down for them and helping them think through strategically options, as opposed to just undertaking sort of a knee-jerk response to doing something they think is the right thing to do without having fully thought about it. The other thing I find with some of the groups I work with is this sense that I want to build my team quickly. I know this person and this person and this person, so I'm going to hire them. So it's almost like I'm going to hire my friends, or I'm going to hire those who are, connected with me, sort of with like an N of one degree, right? And so I
right.
think one of the things that I tend to pause and remind them of is to build a team. We've got to do it through multiple lenses, one of which is this diversity lens. And by diversity, I just don't mean racial or ethnic background or sexual orientation or any of that, but rather diversity at all levels. So let's try to find someone who is not an exact replica of you, who may be your best friend, but rather let's sort of expand beyond your network. You can access mine, we can access other networks. And so again, it's the notion of connecting people and connecting the dots in a way that people have never thought to connect the dots. And so this is again part of my daily job, and this is what I love doing, is just pressure testing, working with people to pressure test some of their assumptions, and they find very quickly that it's not that they've gotten off on a wrong assumption, but rather they haven't that their aperture wasn't as wide as it can be.
And it's just to kind of round out this conversation in my mind as well, is that this is not just a conversation about a company that's a startup. There is an evolution that every company is going to go through in terms of, adding people, and people leave and people come. And I mean, as you kind of go through that sort of cycle as a leader, it's important to keep that, reminding yourself that, hey, look, how do we get back to this sort of broader view of the world? And the
Yeah.
best way to do it is to have a diverse team. I know as I've assembled teams before, I'm like, I know that I need some people that I know that, I absolutely, can count on their
Hmm.
decisions. However, I don't want a bunch of people that all sort of come along, because I want people that kind of go against the current, and people that go aside the current, people that view the world totally different, so that you can tackle these problems in the world. And I mean, just to come back to startups one more time, they are fragile, and they're going to need these diverse ideas to be able to tackle the challenges in front of them. But as
Yeah.
they grow, they're going to need the same sort of thought pattern again and again. How do I keep my team diverse, and how do I keep new ideas coming?
Right. And again, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't sort of hire the people they've worked with in the past, because oftentimes that's how great startups, start. I know of a group that has worked together. They're not in the biotech space, they're in the high tech space, but they've worked together with over six companies, and they have
Mm,
taken every company public, and essentially five out of the six were unicorns. So it makes sense that they all just continue to work together, right?
right.
However, not taking the time to sit down and weigh all the other options to see what other paths are available, I think entrepreneurs, founders are doing themselves a disservice. And so it's this is the fun part of my job, is just kind of, working with them to pressure test again, just like I had mentors who helped me along my path and my journey to do the same.
And you also told me that you're a coach and a mentor as well. Who do you focus on with your coaching and mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a, I'm not professionally a coach as such, but I, work, as I said, with entrepreneurs and with people who are wanting to be CEOs. Oftentimes they could be academics who are leaving the academic world and are now venturing into the corporate world and have a technology and or an idea and want to sort of take that to fruition and really don't know where to start with respect to networking and business contacts and just business plan structuring, et cetera, or even cap tables, et cetera. Um, and then I find, so I'm also involved as an advisor or mentor with the organization called TIE. It stands for the Indus Enterprise, TIE, and you can look at it online. It's a wide network of executives, both in tech and biotech and a variety of other areas, supporting young individuals. Typically they're young age wise, but that's not necessarily a criteria to get involved, who are graduates from PhD programs or even undergraduate programs who've got great ideas, whether they be in biotech or whether they be in some consumer app even, but really working with them and helping them just think through business ideas and business structures and financial structures, et cetera. So, part of what I love doing in my role these days is just helping people think through problems and helping them problem solve. And it's really the young entrepreneurs who are eager to learn, who kind of, bright eyed and bushy tailed, as they say, and just want to kind of lap it all up. And so those are who I focus on. But I don't have a formal coaching practice. But, again, I find myself often playing the role of not a life coach, but just a coach who's kind of reminding people from the side, hey, just remember, think this way, do things this way, ask these types of questions, et cetera, et cetera.
So important. And then you're also involved with women in bio as well. Is that correct?
I am. I'm a member of Women in Bio. It's an organization that is nationwide. There is a Boston chapter as well as several other local chapters. I'm also part of the Executive Women in Bio, which is sort of a subgroup of that of Women in Bio. And that group is both groups are really, they're there to support women in who are in executive roles to just have professional liaisons to connect with and just learn from each other and engage with each other. Specifically, the Executive Women in Bio, there is a boardroom ready program which I undertook or I went through, and what that does is it's an annual program that takes in about 20 executives at the SVP C level, and just sort of talks to them. I don't want to say teaches them or trains them, because there's no reason women need to be trained and men don't need to be trained, but it gives them an opportunity to be on boards, that is, but it gives these women an opportunity to network with like-minded people who all want to serve on boards and to help each other through the process of engaging with particular recruiters and individuals who are in positions to support these women getting on board. So yeah, Women in Bio is a great organization, and I've often served as a panelist in a variety of sort of discussion topics, mostly around professional career building, even things such as, one of the things that's been in the news a lot, which is just managing work-life balance, as a woman. How are women taking the brunt of the COVID stepaways from the workforce, and what does that mean, and how do we navigate that? So there's all sorts of discussions around work-life balance or life-work balance. So yeah, I've been a member for a while, and it's a great organization.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I'm working on right now in general is a book around how the shift that we saw in with COVID and coming home is that a lot more people are overcommitted now than they've ever been, and and that overcommitment, I've seen it in my own personal life, but also with my daughter. My daughter has three boys, and at one point, she called my wife and said, "Hey, would you come lend us a hand?" And luckily, we're able to do that. But I mean, I can think of all the people that are out there that don't have that same situation. That it's just this here's your continued reality of having to try and manage your children man or woman, and your home life and professional life all together, especially now.
Yeah, I'll just add a comment to that. Or there was I guess it was yesterday that the EU or UK specifically announced that they're going to go to a four-day week, right? And
Yeah,
so
they
this is
did.
not everywhere, but a lot of
Yeah.
companies made that announcement. And I find that the US seems to trail the UK or the EU also, but the UK in particular on in many topics, including this one. And so I'm kind of waiting with bated breath to see how that all pans out, because I think one of the other topics, as you probably run across, Don, in this sort of day and age of COVID, is what's a workable work situation? What kind of
Hmm.
flex time makes sense? And some companies are demanding that their employees return full time 5 days a week. Others are going quite the opposite route, 180, saying you don't need to come back at all, lifelong. If you work
Right.
with us, you never need to come back. And there's, I'm sure, some in between phenomena or in between situation that is ideal. But you're right. So that's part of the conversation that we end up having both at Women in Bio as well as at Chief, which is another organization that I was involved in or I'm involved in. Again, it's another network for senior women to connect and have a dialogue like this and about topics that are relevant to everyone, but for some reason hit women more acutely than they do men. And so, yeah, coming back to the UK, I am really curious to see how that pans out. And, I think it's going to actually improve mental health overall, and just give people a little bit of a breather. But frankly, they'll just be more productive because, there's an option. Options are always good, right? Optionality is always a good thing. And so I think, hopefully the US can learn from that, but we'll have to see where the data lands with respect to what the UK has done.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it will be an interesting journey to watch, just in general. So there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
Charting uncharted territory. It's that I'm going to get a little philosophical, if I may now.
Yeah, sure.
Um, it's it's kind of like this fear of the unknown, and I learned to embrace it over the years. There's lots of things I'm nervous about, I'm scared about, just like everyone else, and I'm inspired to sort of go the other side, sort of traverse that bridge, if you will. And someone said to me, don't be fearful, be curious. So
Mm.
that curiosity kind of inspires me to just continue to push forward.
Yeah, it's interesting how we can initially take maybe a feeling that we have. So a good example is giving a speech. So the anxiety that you feel giving a speech could be terror. It could be,
Mhm.
an awful feeling, but it also could be an exhilaration of the fact that you get to share your ideas and get them out
Yeah.
there. So it could be, one of the two, but it's how you mentally sort of frame it that becomes most important in terms of the reaction you might feel as an individual as well. Important.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's what inspires me and kind of fuels me. And I know that, the difference between inspiration and motivation, there's lots of things that motivate me. And I won't go through that laundry list, but what comes from within is sort of this desire to just kind of be curious about what's out there.
Absolutely. And Ramani, what concerns you?
Uh, I want to say generally empathy and kind of a lack of connectivity that we see in the world generally, but specifically kind of bringing it back to my world of biotech and biopharma. I think that there are so many well qualified individuals who can um, lend their expertise and their time to be mentors, advisors, sponsors, allies. And I don't think enough people do that, because I think there is an inherent, and it's not an intentional selfishness. I think it's just people don't know that there is a gap that they can fill. And it is so fulfilling to fill that gap. And so that concerns me, is that there are so many well to do, well regarded, highly regarded individuals who've been so successful in our industry. And I'm speaking about the industry I spent my life in, who just are disregarding the reality that their help can be so value added to this one individual or two individuals or group of individuals who all they need is a pep talk, or all they need is an introduction, or all they need is some guidance on a particular question or a particular area. Doesn't take much effort, but goes a long way. And so, no, earlier on, we were talking about just even if we could help one person, that would be more than enough. And I think if more people were aware of this, I think they would step up to the plate. I just don't think people are um, mindful enough to think about things this way. So what concerns me is general apathy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it is an interesting problem, right? Because I mean, I also so I mean, it's a two-part problem that I kind of hear you talking about. One part is sort of understanding that people have the need and, how you get it out there. The second part is, just making that connection and making sure that you're contributing. And, and it's kind of funny because I work with a couple of different people that do sort of the early investment in companies, and those companies aren't making any money. They're
Mhm.
nowhere near any place that they're going to be making any money. And so the idea of helping them for some sort of a consulting fee is totally out of the out of the question.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
at the same time, it feels so good, oftentimes to help out. And so yeah, I know I greatly enjoy it. I have to be careful about how much time I actually spend doing that because I do have to pay my bills
Yeah.
too. But at the same time, it's so much fun to get involved and see
Yeah.
their energy.
And I'm not, I'm talking also about, Don, I'm talking about people who, who are probably retired, who've had great
Mm,
exits, who've been CEOs time and
sure.
time over, and who really have the time, and it's really not much effort for them, who serve on boards already, but,
Sure.
they could just, a little bit of time on their hands or from their end spent with an entrepreneur who's got some questions about how this particular individual ran a business or built a business could just go a long way. And it's more important, I think, or I should say, it's as important, if not more, for those individuals who are coming from underrepresented populations where they don't have the beacon, where they don't have the role model to look up to. If the notion that if you can see it, you can be it. That's all well and good, but if you're not seeing it, then where do I start to becoming? And so that's where I just think that I use the term empathy, which might sound negative, but it's all said with good intent, which is I think there are lots of dots on the board. I think we just need more people to make the connections.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for clarifying that point. It is such an important point as well. And some of the individuals I know that do some great work, here that's kind of their past is that they were previous CEOs, but they're helping to
Yeah.
coach and mentor companies, leaders, in this area in Colorado where I'm currently based. But I mean, you're right. I mean, there are just so many great minds that are out there that could be tapped into as well. What excites you?
Oh, convergence overall, the concept of things converging. Um, I was at a conference recently, and actually, as it turns out, it was called the Convergence Conference. But it's beyond it, it's a name, it's a nice name, and the topics are mostly about biotech. And so I was invited to participate and moderate a panel. And so I proposed moderating a panel entitled "What Can Biotech Do to Support Climate Resilience?" And people don't talk enough about climate change and climate resilience in our industry because that's not what we're focused on. But we're focused on healthcare, and guess what? Healthcare is heavily impacted by what happens in the climate. And so it was a really interesting topic. We had a varied panel of individuals, and we could have gone 100 different directions, which we kind of did on the panel. But the idea that we can start to converge on our discussions and our thinking to help each other, intra-industry or inter-industry with solutions. And so the dialogue of how can the climate resilience groups lend or learn from biotech and vice versa through positive collaboration and partnerships is a good one, and hopefully those conversations will continue. Similarly, on the health inequity side, there's a convergence that's happening. Pharma companies are becoming more aware because of ESG guidance and ESG sort of regulations or guidelines, to be more aware of how they are developing drugs, in licensing drugs, accessing technologies, but then getting them out to patients. And I think this convergence in thinking is going to really kind of leapfrog us to beyond where we are in this industry. So that's kind of what excites me, is the notion of things all coming together, and hopefully kind of, the whole notion of 1 + 1 is equal to 3. It's not equal to 2. And so when things converge, they can be better than the whole.
Yeah, and I know I've run across somebody recently that is working on like better environmental ways to create, different sort of supporting structures, if you will, for creating drugs. And so,
Mhm.
the whether it's from the wastewater side, or even, the recyclable materials that come out of, development, that this individual is working, kind of in that broader sense, which is a bit outside of our direct area, but at the same time it is aligned with that convergence that you're talking about as well.
It is, and there are venture groups out there that are investing in biotech, but are also investing in deep tech, other tech, if you will. And the fact that they're investing in multiple different areas puts them in a good position to start to help some of this convergence happen with technologies and products and the overlap, et cetera. We're seeing it happen in the digital health space. We're seeing it happen in AI as it pertains to discovering and developing. We're seeing that being, DE&I being incorporated in drug development with clinical trials and diversity, et cetera. So I think things are working nicely towards a conversion. So that excites me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Romani, thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate you being on the Life Science Success podcast, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you for your time, Don, and thank you for inviting me again. It was great to be here.
Absolutely.